Political Science Institute, Sciences Po, Gregory Mann of Columbia University, François Ndengwe of the African Advisory Board. Also with us, Michael Kirtley, a documentary filmmaker and journalist. Joining us from London, Imad Mesdoua of Pasco Risk Management, and from the State University of New York at Cortland, New York, Kassim Kone. Welcome back to all of you. Imad Mesdoua, I want to begin with you with the about faces. We've mentioned two of them. There's another about face that we haven't mentioned. There was the U.S. Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, who went to Algiers back in December. There was the French president, who also went to the Algerian capital during the month of December. Both had asked for more active help on the part of Algiers. They'd been refused that. And now today, Algiers is saying that the Western forces can use its airspace in the fight against those rebels. What's changed minds in Algiers?
Well, I don't really think minds have changed entirely. The Algerian position from the very beginning has been sort of reluctant to openly endorse any kind of foreign intervention in Mali. Algeria has been advocating a sort of multi-dimensional approach where dialogue and political solutions are favored. As I mentioned earlier, Algeria has actually been keen to distinguish between the groups that the international community can talk to. More importantly, I'd say Algeria has been advocating regional solutions to regional problems. But I think that there are different reasons for why Algeria has enabled or allowed French troops to fly over its territory. I think the first one is that Algeria certainly doesn't want to be seen as a roadblock to any solution. Everybody recognizes, I think, that the situation right now is dire since last week. It's posing a direct threat to Bamako and to the south of the country, indeed. But I think the main reason is that Algeria isn't entirely against the foreign intervention, even though publicly it's shown a reluctance to support it.
All right. So in other words, there's the rhetoric, and then there's what's actually happening. Pierre Conessa, do you agree with that analysis?
Well, you know, you're right. I mean, the rhetoric speech is explaining that independence of Africa, the role of African rulers, etc., etc.
In Le Soir d'Alger, for instance, there was a former general today who penned an article saying this is a return of colonialism on the part of France.
Well, he can say that if he do think so, but I don't think that this intervention in Mali is asked by the local government is looking like a new colonialism. No, just remember that at the beginning of the Black years, you remember in Algeria, the Algerian rulers were asking France to help them. So, you know, history is changing.
And of course, Gregory Mann, Algeria is so important to all of this.
Well, Algeria not only is, to some extent, you could say that Algeria thinks of northern Mali, of the Malian Sahara, as its backyard, as its kind of hinterland, which it is. And certainly people in northern Mali often think of Algeria as their place. In the far northern stretches of the Malian Sahara, it's Algerian currency and not the Malian or the West African CFA that is used. So there's a deep connection there. Also, Algeria is the 800-pound gorilla in terms of the defense budget, in terms of the military presence, in terms of the intelligence network that Algeria has. Their capacities far outstrip those of any of their southern neighbors. But they seem to see, as your analyst in London was saying, that they seem to see a certain degree of ambiguity as a kind of resource, that they want to own both sides of the question. They at some points have been supportive of the MNLA movement, at other times have been less supportive of MNLA. They do not want to see Al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb, which in its origins, in its kind of DNA, is an Algerian insurgency from the 1990s. They don't want to see Al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb back and active, or more active, on Algerian soil. They would rather have that be a Malian problem, a southern Saharan problem, rather than an Algerian problem.
There's Libya to the north as well, which is a problem. Mali, of course, in the context, we've been mentioning it, of the coup back in March in Bamako, the takeover of the north by Islamists. But could, in fact, the fall of Tripoli more than a year ago and the ouster of Muammar Gaddafi be the real genesis, Michael Kirtley, of what's unfolding today?
I think that would be really very simplistic to say that, mainly because Al-Qaeda of the Islamic Maghreb existed well before the fall of Tripoli. The drug running in that part of the world has existed well before the fall of Tripoli. And the grievances on the part of the northern population have existed for over 50 years. So, on the other hand, you can definitely say that the fall of Gaddafi was a trigger, was a catalyst for this to take place, mainly because it freed up a lot of soldiers that abandoned Gaddafi, that came back to northern Mali, together with weapons that they had stolen from Libya, and brought them to their various sides of the rebellions that they were supporting. At the beginning, the MNLA benefited quite a bit from that, and Sardine also benefited to a certain degree. And so this enabled them to have the military force to carry out this particular rebellion. But I think that to simply say that this is one rebellion that was more successful than another would hurt the idea that there needs to be a resolution, a longer-term resolution, rather than having a rebellion every 3 or 4 years.
Rather than having a rebellion every 3 or 4 years, François Ndengwe, do you agree that?
Yes, I agree with what has been said. And we can think of what happened in France. And you had General de Gaulle coming and saying, we've lost a battle, but we haven't lost a war. Who is the de Gaulle in Mali? And again, they've had 1 year, so they've done nothing. I think I still come back to this. And the French will not solve this problem. This problem has to be solved by Malians and by Africans. And when you're weak, you could try to get into an alliance with people to make you stronger. What is the alliance of Mali now? We were talking about France. France can stand with NATO or even European allies. And this brings me to the issue of African Union. There is a commission called the Peace and Security Commission in Africa, one of the commission of the African Union. How effective have they been so far about this issue? This is the voice of a whole continent. We're speaking of a whole continent fighting a handful of jihadis, of rebels. I think if I were an African general, I would be very ashamed today.
All right, you're mentioning how Africa has to step up to the plate. Gregory Mann talking about how the North can sometimes be perceived as Algeria's backyard. There's Libya to the north. There's also Nigeria to the south, where the government's been battling the Islamist radicals of Boko Haram. Let's go to Lagos now and say hello to Tunde Fatunde, columnist for the Lagos Guardian. Tunde, first of all, the French foreign minister was cagey as to when foreign troops would show up. We know that it's a Nigerian general that's supposed to head up that West African force. Any word on your end as to when they'll be deployed?
Oh, the deployment is taking place within the next few days and headed by a Nigerian general. A technical team of members of the Nigerian Air Force is already in Bamako to repair some of the helicopters belonging to the Malian Air Force. And so within the next few days, the Nigerian contingent will be there, which also includes the contingent from Niger. Actually, the Nigerian military planes will fly the contingents from Niger to Bamako.
Oh, so they're not only showing up, they're also going to taxi the other, some of the other troops. Tunde, what's the reaction in Lagos to what's going on in Mali?
Well, the reaction is very favorable to, first of all, the French intervention. And we also know that northern Mali has a military base, international base of Boko Haram. And the whole question is that once you hit this military base, you disorganize them. You now weaken the Boko Haram elements in Nigeria. Right now, they are more or less in disarray in Nigeria. And if you can also hit them in northern Mali, then you'll be in a position to now negotiate with the moderate elements of this sect.
Tunde, you know the old joke that goes that in West Africa there are two major powers, France and Nigeria. As far as that goes, they're teaming up in this instance. How do people feel about that, about the Nigerians and the French teaming up?
No, I mean, the Nigerian public is very pragmatic. If I am in trouble and you are ready to help me at that given moment, then we have common interests. We may not have permanent interest. We have common interests. So it's not a question of the Nigerian public or the Nigerian military looking at the French army or the French intervention as an intervention from a foreign power, because we are dealing with an internationalist jihadist, and you need an internationalist cooperation to be able to handle this situation.
Michael Kirtley.
This is very disturbing to me because it's all very beautiful, isn't it? We have the French that did something. They won a little victory there, and now the Nigerians and the Togolese and all the others are coming in, and that's the beginning of what? That's the beginning of, are these people trained together to work together? Are the French going to take the lead? Are the Nigerians going to take the lead? And once somebody decides to take the lead, what's going to happen next? There are so many questions here. For the Malians today in Bamako to be dancing in the street, for the Nigerians to say we're cooperating with the French, and somehow that means something good. And this doesn't mean anything in terms of prosecuting this war. It means strictly nothing. The real question of prosecuting this war is, what are the objectives? Are the objectives containment? Are the objectives control? Or are the objectives destruction? Are we going to destroy the jihadi groups, which means we have to make major decisions? Are we going to contain them, or are we going to somehow negotiate with them? None of this has been described.
Pierre Conessa, what's your inkling? What is the objective?
I would like to come back 2 minutes about what my colleagues said about, the leader and the rulers. I think that Africa doesn't need de Gaulle. Africa needs Mandela. I mean, people able to manage a country respecting local habits, civilization, etc., and to make people to live together. Because the history of Mali is exactly the opposite of that. I mean, the Tuareg question has 50 years of fights, revolt, insurrection, etc., and this question has never been solved, which means that the rulers in Bamako are mainly using the country regarding, this north part of the country, like a region in which it's not, this army was conducting itself with a very brutal attitude. So I do think that today the responsibility of the rulers in Africa is mainly to manage, this opposition, because no country has a total simple composition, even Mali. So I quite agree with my colleague. I mean, today what's the political objective of this military intervention? Is it to rebuild this military government? In that case, with whom? I mean, if we have exactly facing the same guy using the public money to enrich, if we are using, the opposition between South and North, we never solve this question.
Imad Mesdoua, your thoughts in terms of Michael Kirtley there spelling out three sort of options as to what the objective of the intervention could be. What's the most realistic when you look at the sprawl that is the Sahara Desert?
Well, I agree with most of the comments that were made in terms of how deep-rooted the problems that we are now facing are in Mali and indeed throughout more troubled parts of Africa. The key, I think, problem at the moment is the sort of short-sighted intervention methodology, let's call it that way, which is to sort of come in and win short battles and quick battles and declare, as it was done in Iraq, mission accomplished, and to exit, or sometimes not exit, without any kind of strategy or long-term proposal for development. These are the key issues that are, affecting these kinds of crises in Africa. In Mali, there's a key issue, which is there are tons of issues that are the result of a deep colonial heritage. There's a colonial, the borders are artificial. I think you can safely say that. That there was never any real attempt to deal with national unity with a pragmatic sort of vision. And economic development has not been thought of in a very sustainable and a realistic way. But to go back to your question, to answer what is the most realistic outcome for the current intervention, I definitely rule out destruction or a sort of elimination of these groups. It's going to be very difficult. What will, I think, and call me airy-fairy, but I think what will really beat these groups, as it did in Algeria, is not pure eradication, but a sort of multi-pronged approach, which would include economic development, a dialogue, dealing with the power vacuum that exists in Bamako and throughout the country, building institutions at the local level. I think that will realistically be a successful intervention.
Gregory Mann, taking the long view is obviously your job. Is this going to be a long job? When you hear the way Imad Mesdoua says, you need a multi-pronged approach. That's not, as we said it, we quoted the French foreign minister at the outset, a matter of several weeks.
No, it's not a matter of several weeks, but neither is it up to the French foreign minister to determine what the appropriate outcome is for West African states and societies. What the French foreign minister is saying, that we see our goals as particular and as fairly narrow, and they're about security, and they're about terrorism, and they're about hostage taking, and they might be valid goals, they might be invalid goals, but those are the French goals. They overlap only partly with what's important to West African societies. They overlap only partly with what's important to the government in Bamako, other West African governments, and to rebel movements like the MNLA and others. Obviously don't overlap with those of the Islamists. The conversation seems a little odd to me, because what we're talking about is a military intervention that happened on very short notice very recently, and it's the effective equivalent to kind of emergency medicine. In other words, this was an intervention that was made because there was an emergency, that if Sévère fell, there would be a whole new kind of humanitarian disaster that would be produced, and the logistical problems of any future sorting out of the conflict would be much more difficult. This is, if you go to the emergency room to have some kind of problem looked at, they don't at the same time ask to check the health of your teeth, to do a colonoscopy, and to see, what the calcium content of your bones might be. Those are long-term medical problems that you would think of in another context. In this context, the goal of the French and of the ECOWAS nations is one they talked about for many, many, many months. They talked about moving in a diplomatic track towards negotiations with groups with whom you could negotiate. They tried to pull away Ansar Dine from ACMI and Moujao. They tried to pull Ansar Dine into the negotiating table. Ansar Dine left the negotiating table. They've tried to work with MNLA, and that has had some success, and there's been a conflicting set of interests, notably on the part of Blaise Compaoré, the Burkinabe president and the West African mediator for this crisis. So the diplomacy has largely failed. At this moment, you have a crisis that became very acute over the last week, and something I believe needed to be done, or we would be having a very different conversation right now. What would the conversation be right now? The conversation right now would be, oh my goodness, look, now the airfield in Sévère has been lost. Now there are tens or maybe hundreds of thousands more of internally displaced people and refugees. And so what now does that diplomatic track mean? What now does that track that say we need political stability in Bamako, we must have elections in Bamako before we can do anything about reuniting the country's territory? We would be having an entirely different conversation, and it would be in a much worse situation going forward. So I think that the first of the French objectives, the most modest of the original French objectives, was to block this assault, and that they effectively managed to do. Sévère did not fall. That is not a huge military victory that will go down in the annals of history, but it's important in this particular moment. There are longer-term problems that absolutely need to be solved about state stability, about security in the north, about peace and security along the Niger Bend, about the heterogeneity of the Niger Bend. Timbuktu, Gao. These are not cities that are Tuareg cities. These are ethnically diverse cities. They're predominantly Muslim cities, but those Muslims did not want to live under the Sharia rule of Moujao and of ACMI, etc. So there are long conversations that need to be had with Mali's neighbors, with Mauritania, with Niger, etc. But those are for the future. For the moment, clearly President Issoufou in Niger, Macky Sall in Senegal, they think this is a significant crisis. They think that it's dangerous for them, for their own territories, and they'd like to see greater stability in Mali. And that's the first thing that needs to be built up. The institutions within Bamako are important. Legitimate interlocutors within Bamako are important for the rebel groups. Some conversation with MNLA will have to happen down the line about what will be the role of the Tuareg in a reconstituted Malian territory. But all the neighbors seem to feel that Mali should maintain its territorial integrity, which is the phrase that they use. The MNLA have disputed that in the past. Their positions have changed on that, but it seems to be an important question. But those questions, I'm an historian. I believe in the importance of the past, but I don't think the answer to everything goes back 50 or 60 years. Sometimes the answer goes back 4 years. I don't believe in the inside-outside distinction. We can argue that this is an African problem, but it's also a European problem. It's a problem created by European intervention in Libya, in part. It's a problem created by European appetite for cocaine, in part. It's a problem created by European ransom payments, in part. And so there's a European role in creating the problem. It seems to me appropriate that the Malian government could say to its European partners, or in this case, France, we need help, please help us, because we can't meet this challenge that has partly been ginned up and concocted by forces that are far beyond not only our control, but extend far beyond our territory.
And point taken, François Ndengwe, you have to first put out the fire before you can rebuild the house?
No, I think, I don't agree with this opinion saying that we had an emergency. In my view, you had emergency from day one of the occupation. You have the emergency when people started to cutting hands. You have the emergency where you have people fleeing from their homes. Why haven't you reacted at that moment? And you have the
because
time.
they tried diplomacy.
Exactly. This was a failure. How can you, what sort of diplomacy with who? Even the African Union, in one of its communiques, said it was encouraging the government of Mali to go and talk with the armed groups. How is this possible? Can you believe this? This is terrible. The diplomacy will be to go after who are financing these people, who are arming them, where are they getting their money from? People are talking of countries from the Arab world. This is where the diplomacy could go and fight after these people. And then secondly, which is, in my view, is very, very important here, when you look at the situation, where you have the total collapse of the political personnel, and this is why I was mentioning General de Gaulle, people who have caused the problem, in my view, are not able to solve it. We want new leadership in Mali. We want new leadership either on the political scene or even in the military. I think this is very important. And lastly, if I may, I have to quote very quickly from a book from Kwame Nkrumah, as I was mentioning the issue, which is very, very important because this is not only
of Ghana.
This is not only a Mali affair. Writing a book in 1963, he said that in the last chapter of the book is Africa Must Unite. He said, in my view, therefore, a united Africa, that is the political and economic unification of the African continent, should seek three objectives. Firstly, we should have an overall economic planning. Secondly, we should aim at the establishment of a unified military and defense strategy.
All right, but that's
so
yeah.
This is these people we've lost a lot of time. We've lost a lot of time, and we're not able to be the master of the strat of security on our continent. So perhaps if this crisis could be of some help, it could be a call for African leaders to take seriously the issue of being themselves the actors of the defense on the continent.
Okay, but of course, right for the time being, Pierre Conessa, the argument being that it's a bit of a mismatch back with these groups that Gregory Mann was describing, having them being fueled by drug money, by ransom money, and in some cases getting funds from the Gulf states, it seems. The French president was cagey on the matter when we interviewed him back in October.
Well, the question of resources is very important to understand effectively. I think that, these insurgents are mainly living from traffics. Through Saharan area traffics, because they impose taxes which the government and the regular state are not able to tax. The second one is drug trafficking. And the last one is ransom and the kidnapping activity. And when you sum, all the ransom which are today asked by the insurgents regarding just the French hostages, it's all around 150 million euros, which means quite half or two-thirds of the military budget of Mali. So you understand that we are facing a very contradictory situation in which we are using military means to fight against the groups with whom we are negotiating, and they are asking sums which are incomparable, with the help we are furnishing to the Malian government. So this situation, and the last one you mentioned it, is the money coming from Gulf states. And today nobody wants to talk about that. Nobody wants to talk about that because, we are using Saudi Arabia to fight against terrorism. What does that mean? I mean, is it useful to ask Saudi Arabia to fight against terrorism and to fight against jihadism and to fight against Salafists? I mean, it's completely stupid.
All right, and it's the fodder, obviously, for another discussion in which we'll continue. I want to thank you, Pierre Connaissant, François Ndengwe. I want to thank as well Michael Kirtley, Gregory Mann, and from joining us, Imad Mesdoua, as well as Kasim Kone from State University of New York at Cortland, and Tunde Fatunde in Lagos. Thank you for being with us. Stay with us. At the top of the hour, we'll have much more, including coverage of the discussion on Mali that will be taking place shortly at the United Nations in New York. This is France 24.